Say if you combine the French, the English, and sprinkled some German bunkers, what would you get? That's right, the bailiwick of Guernsey. Guernsey is an island within the English Channel. It's part of a sovereign country known as the United Kingdom. However, it's somewhat self-governing and shares the same status as a nearby island and friendly rival, Jersey. Its flag is an English cross which represents the English, and a Norman cross within it which represents the close relations with the nearby Normandy in France. There's also a chalk giant plus a gecko which landed from India in 2020. Alright, let's dive into the education of Guernsey. Currently, there is a good amount of primary, secondary, and higher education programs, including in some smaller isles controlled by Guernsey. The president of the education programs is Andrea Dudley Owen, and the primary language is English. In Guernsey, the system is similar to England and Wales. 4 to 11-year-olds are in primary school from reception to year 6, and key stage 1 to 2. Ages 11 to 16 go to high school from year 7 to year 11, key stage 3 and key stage 4. Education is necessary from the age of 5 to the age of 16. 87% of 16-year-olds will stay in education post-16. Education is free for all students up to the age of 18. After high school, you may go to have an apprenticeship, go to sixth form, or to college. If you go to sixth form or college, we'll probably move to England for higher education. Furthermore, the transport system is all around the Isle. Roads are concentrated more on the coasts, especially by the east, by the capital of St. Peter Port. Condor ferries are a common type of sea transport in the English or French Channel. They can take the average person from Guernsey to Jersey, France, and England in ports such as Portsmouth. Companies of sea transport include Bumblebee, Travel Trident, and quite a bit more. Let's look into the travel within the actual island. Before we start, it's important to know that Guernsey has a plan to become a net zero area. Your combustion engines will be stopped in 2030. A pellet train moved around the capital in the summer. It's called Victor. A pellet train is basically a train which is smaller and goes on the road. I've been on one before. Taxis are also pretty common. You need a license to be a taximan. There's a website for most of the taxis of Guernsey, and there are services for the crippled. As you can tell, Guernsey is a more eco-friendly area, so cycling is praised and Sark is a great place to be active and cycle. Buses are owned by CT Plus Guernsey and is mostly state-owned. No matter the distance, a bus ticket is always £1. Private coaches are available in transit, island coachways, and island taxis. Guernsey drives on the left side of the road just like England. Roads are more narrow with speed limits of 40 km per hour in urban areas and 56 km per hour elsewhere. Anyways, let's continue on the two main travelling methods, starting with rail transport. However, that was partially a lie. The steam-based railways in the island of Guernsey were abandoned in 1934. The Germans also attempted to build railways but failed as they lost the war. But the railways are on a whole different island, which is still controlled by the bailiwick. This railway is in Alderney and carried royalty in the Victorian era. It's 3.2 kilometers long and was made in 1857. It is the most popular in the holidays. Slight modifications were made by the Germans in 1943 when the Brits landed in the toe of Italy. Finally, the airport of Guernsey. Opened in the spring of '39. However, due to the Germans taking control, the airport had its first flight in 1946 to Portsmouth. After 1951, more and more destinations opened to other Channel Islands and cities in France and England, such as Grenoble and London. Tourism in Guernsey is a major source of profit, with it mostly being from northerners of England. Tourists tend to go there for the beaches, warmer weather, and agricultural society. Owen Cornet too. Guernsey has taken a stance of strong restrictions in COVID, and so visiting the area isn't recommended. In December 2013, the stock market opened in Guernsey. Its main headquarters lay in the capital and holds a proper market. EU policies do not apply to the island of Guernsey, as it is part of the UK. GFSC manages to regulate proper business within banks and keeps shenanigans to a minimum. Electrical grids link Guernsey to England, and a possible grid is possible to France. Speaking of electricity, Guernsey is, as previously mentioned, a more eco-friendly area. Renewable electricity is a more preferable option. However, oil still classes a relatively notable amount of the energy used by Guernsey. There's a whole list of companies from Guernsey. However, as far as I'm aware, there isn't any which is well known to the public. Markets, construction, and business are the most common ones. There's a McDonald's for the 62,000 people living in Guernsey, which we make quite a lot of quid. We use quid or pounds in Guernsey. Also, don't expect any car companies in the island of Sark, are now controlled by Guernsey, which has 0 cars. There's a total of 28 banks in the island of Guernsey, making banking a significant factor within Guernsey's economy, as well as the Guernsey cattle, which is a native cow with huge amounts of protein in its milk. There's also the golden Guernsey goat, a rare and fine wonder. The area's GDP is 151st if it was a sovereign nation. Let's continue and move on to something everyone loves: sports. There are 3 sports stadiums, and the main and only rugby team is Guernsey RFC, which fight for the Siam club against the Jersey team. Guernsey is not the Olympics or FIFA. Guernsey and Jersey also fight on in cricket for the inter-insular match. Guernsey's favourite sport is easily football, with there being various amounts of football teams within the dependency. Furthermore, arts and publications haven't been a major field within Guernsey. There's been some notable examples. IEB is the main broadcasting service in Guernsey. Folk music is one of the main blossoming trends of Guernsey music. Before 1903, it was even better with them inventing an instrument known as a hurdy-gurdy. This is disputed though. The Book of Ebenezer Lepage, sorry for the pronunciation, is one of the most popular books based on Guernsey. And no, it's not that Christmas story. The famous French liberal Victor Hugo also wrote some books about the Channel Isle. Let's dive into the actual culture of this world. There are no World Heritage sites, and people tend to be more liberal. Christianity easily dominates the Isle, with being described in a 2005 interview that there's only been a handful of Muslims within Guernsey. The Guernsey holidays are practically the same as the Anglo techniques and focuses on Christian holidays, such as Easter and Christmas. Notable people who live or were born in Guernsey are Zeph Eisenberg, Victor Herbert, Aria Rossetti, Vice Admiral James Samaras, and Perrotine Massey. Sir Cherry is the anthem of Guernsey. The coat of arms is nearly the same of Normandy and Britain. However, there's a sprig and thinner legs that can't hold the lions. The 3 main languages of Guernsey are English, French, a Guernsey dialect known as Dirty French, a sort of mix of French and English. There's a Guernsey festival where music is played, and another celebration known as I don't know how to pronounce it, but it's La Vierre Marche, on the first Monday of July. Many markets are open and many different products are sold, which tend to be drinks or other cuisine. Speaking of which, Guernsey gâché is a sweet bread or sort of cake which is made from mixing dry fruits with bread and occasionally adding some nice cream to it. Guernsey Bean Jar is the main cuisine of the island. It is a bean-based stew which is sold by markets on colder months. On days when the ovens weren't used, such as Sundays, the citizens would be given permission to use the baker's oven to cook the dish. This mostly stopped after the Great War, where money was booming and then crashed down due to the Great Depression. We've looked into the economy and culture, so now let's see my personal favourite topic: politics. There's 40 states or seats in Guernsey, with 2 of them representing Alderney. This parliament's origin isn't entirely clear. It was probably within the creation of the first parliament or during the early 1900s. Guernsey has high relations with all of its neighbours. Jersey is a friend, and they have a slight friendly rivalry. France is a close friend, which they are slowly drifting away from, and England is basically their best ally. Guernsey holds a limited military of volunteers. The 10 parishes or provinces of Guernsey contain a decent defence. However, it's mostly used for border control or fishing disputes with the nearby European Union. LGBT rights and equality is all right, with a process of anti-discrimination laws being completed from 1983 to finally in 2018. The law is more or less the same towards the British. Guernsey is within the British-Irish Council and is a solid ally towards the Irish state. Guernsey is also aligned with the Universal Postal Union within the UN. 165 nations hold relations with Guernsey. 166 if you include the area of Kosovo which is disputed with Serbia. The main court of Guernsey is the Royal Court. One of the most powerful roles in Guernsey is the head of state and the head of government, which holds significant power. Guernsey is a parliamentary, representative, democratic British Crown dependency, which holds its ideology as centrism and autonomism. From the highest peak of Le Moulin in Sark all the way to the 50-kilometre coast of the English Channel and the parishes of Castile, Forest, St Andrew, St Martin, St Peter, St Peter Port, St Sampson, St Saviour, Tourville and Vale. That's all there is to it. However, there was one last thing to ask. How did Guernsey get to its point? Well, let's cover the last topic. History.
Oh, and don't get this confused with Gibraltar. Guernsey is a crown dependency, which means they were never part of the EU. In a nutshell, it's its own thing. About 10,000 years ago, it was recently the Ice Age, and Britain is connected to Europe. People have first reached what is now Guernsey, and 4,000 years later, the English Channel forms, and with it, the Isle of Guernsey is founded. Neolithic farmers would inhabit the coast and trade with the people of Normandy. 6,000 years later came the Romans. The Romans made many hordes, created a trade system with the Isle to Brittany and Britain, and finally created the port of St. Peter in the empire's later stages. The Romans would later leave the Isle in the 400s. The Britons of Britain would later on move out through the Lenna Channel Islands into Brittany. In the journey, the Channel Islands got the modern names. From 535 to 968, the first chapels would appear, and Christianity would take control of the isles. During 933, the Norman kingdom would take control of Guernsey from the Britons of Brittany. The father of William the Conqueror had taken shelter in the Isle of Guernsey, speaking of which, in 1061, William the Conqueror would help the monks fight off the pirates. In 1066, Normandy would take control over England. However, in 1204, the Normandy part of Normandy fell to France, thus alienating the Channel Islands. Plundering of Guernsey was common, and this could be considered the Dark Age of Guernsey. After some decades, the fortifications of Guernsey would begin. The war would plague Guernsey as an exile would raid England at the start of the 100-Year War between the English against the French, the Black Plague, and various conflicts would weaken the Guernsey area. The Dark Age would end in 1394. Richard II would give a new charter which gave benefits to the ever-loyal Channel Islands. Shipbuilding and chalk selling became a business in the Channel Islands. Calvinist Reforms from Normandy brightened Guernsey. However, 3 women were burnt for their Protestant beliefs. Queen Elizabeth I would take control over England, and Protestantism became the top form of Christianity in Guernsey. The Guernsey martyrs were remembered to this day. During the Civil War, Guernsey people sided with the liberal parliamentaries due to the Calvinists, while Jersey stayed with the monarchy, being a major factor in the friendly rivalry today. The Parliament won, and Guernsey reached the Golden Age. Trade was at a high peak with Newfoundland. Ships were gained from wars with Spain. Finally, the Golden Age slowed down after the Napoleonic Wars, where France failed to achieve an invasion of the Isle, and due to mass panic, a huge port in the north of Guernsey, away from France, was created, that being St. Sampson's. At 1901, the population reached 40,000. During 1913, industry was at a great place. Prosperity filled the bailiwick. Surely nothing bad was going to happen, right? World War One had begun, and 3,000 men joined the fight. 1,000 were in their own expedition force, while the others fought in English divisions, mainly in Ypres. The Western Front was won, and by the end of the war, 25 German submarines had been destroyed by Guernsey. Another economic boom, but a smaller one, hit Guernsey, but that easily stopped in 1929. The Great Depression had destroyed the economy. Unemployed workers built defences in the 30s due to another threat, and soon World War II had begun with Nazi Germany. Due to the fall of France, children had to be evacuated from Guernsey to England. Most would never see the old families again. In June of 1940, Guernsey would fall to Germany. The memories of the bombings of 1940 still lay with some survivors. The Germans forced the locals to camps in Europe, one of which being the leader of Guernsey and a former British soldier in World War One. In Alderney, while concentration camps were being made for Jews of Eastern Europe, 2 were handed for the SS to run. They were the only concentration camps in the Channel Islands. There were memorials remembering the terrible fate. German officials offered rewards for those who had racked the soil, loyal locals, who would paint V for Victory as a form of protest. Guernsey became a bastion of German defense, even during the D-Day. It was one of the only parts of the Atlantic Wall which resisted up until Berlin fell. The Germans had heavily fortified the pearl of Hitler's defense. Starvation risked the sieged island due to the Germans being separated from the Isles after D-Day. Swedish companies sent Red Cross aid, which saved Guernsey from complete utter collapse. The island was liberated after a week after Germany's surrender, making it one of the last places in Europe to be liberated, just after Cortland fell. But before Croatia surrendered, Guernsey was liberated on the 9th of May 1945. After the war, the economy was ruined. Martial law and British aid supported the island in its construction as anti-Soviet sentiment had risen at the peak of the Cold War. By the 60s, the bailiwick was mostly recovered. Tourism was on the road to reaching its climax. And in the 80s, the technology and business economies would shape what Guernsey will base its GDP on. In 1991, the internet was created for the public, and this skyrocketed. As well as this, the Cold War would end and Guernsey would become as it is today.
This took far less time due to the help of some new helpers, and I really appreciate you watching this. All the helpers will be featured in the description, along with information sources. Make sure to check out our other order videos such as our Russia 1000 Week Reich timeline.